launch the webcast. And Vitaliy, I think you can get started.
Да, ну я думаю, что мы можем начинать.
All right, I think we can start. I'm happy to welcome all of you at this roundtable. We'll talk about transport and transit opportunities in the Arctic. To remind you, this is the third roundtable discussion within the series of Arctic sessions, which is supported by the Korchakov Foundation and the PORA, Arctic Development Project Office. We all know that the Arctic is getting increasingly important, especially for Russia in its pivot to the east with its logistics. This route will be very important for Russia. Of course, other countries are interested in the Arctic as well, and we have people here who represent those countries. So I think this will be a very interesting and constructive discussion. As you know, in Russia, infrastructure matters are handled by Rosatom, the Russian Nuclear Energy Agency. So let's start with the representative of Rosatom, Maxim Kulinko. Please, Maxim, the floor is yours. Okay, the organizers tell me there are some technical issues, so I just hope they are able to resolve it promptly. Well, while they are trying to sort out these technical glitches, let me remind you quickly what we are going to talk about today. We'll talk about shipping routes in the Arctic, which is very important because we know that we have difficulties with the Russian railways in the Far Eastern territory. So one of the ways to solve this problem is to use shipping lanes instead of railroads. Also, there are some issues related to the legal status of the Northern Sea route. So we would like to discuss this matter with our experts. And we want to talk about developing the Arctic in general, international aspects, and Russian national interests, how they affect this situation. Okay, I can see that since we have problems with Rosatom, we will ask Mr. Gudev to go first. Mr. Gudev represents IMEMO, the Mr. Gudev, are you ready? Yes, I am. I can start, no problem. Happy to welcome all of you colleagues. You know, all people can be divided into two categories: moderate optimists and moderate pessimists. The difference between the two is not that great, but myself, I'm a moderate pessimist, you might say, because I don't really believe in developing the Northern Sea route as a major international shipping artery. At least I have a lot of questions. There are economic difficulties, there are legal difficulties, all sorts of issues. And frankly, when I read newspapers or I see people on TV who say the Northern Sea route is going to be the new Suez Canal, I understand this is wishful thinking. In 2021, it was 33 million tons that we transported through the Northern Sea route, whereas the Suez Canal is responsible for 1 billion tons of cargo a year. So you can't really compare the two. So the Northern Sea route is no Suez Canal, and it's not going to be a new Suez Canal anytime soon. I also took a look at the recent report by the Ministry of Transportation, what kind of cargo they moved on the Northern Sea route, or Norway, Switzerland. Then there was a Chinese company, Germany, the Netherlands. There were 75 international ships, which is not a lot. So they carry timber or not much. And at the beginning of this year, the Russian leadership said we want to reach 30 million tons, metric tons of transit cargo by 2030. So they mention this number, but they don't really explain what kind of cargo they're looking at. So I haven't seen any explanation of what kind of cargo they want to move in the amount of 30 million tons. I remember they had plans to transport fish, and eventually they were only able to move like 50,000 tons. But the goal they said is 1.5 million tons. So we are not even close. So maybe one of you, our dear experts, maybe one of you could tell me, when they talk about 30 million tons, what kind of cargo do they have in mind? And one more question. They talk about transit. Are they talking about domestic transit or international transit? Because these are two different things. With international transit, again, what kind of cargo will it be used to move? Many experts think that the Northern Sea route may be very helpful with container ships. And container ships, they work on the just-in-time premise. There's always a train waiting. So if you're a day late or 2 days late or 3 days late, this is going to be a critical delay. And I don't think that the ice is going to melt completely in the Arctic. There will still be ice and there will be delays. The Northern Sea route is heavily affected by weather. So personally, I think the Northern Sea route can only be used to move natural resources ore, timber, etc. Used to be used to move those resources to the west. Now it's going to be primarily to the east.
энергетических ресурсов. Есть небольшой проект в интересах Министерства обороны, есть строительная...
The defense ministry is interested in moving a little bit of cargo. Apologies. For some reason, I got disconnected. I'm back now. Now, I want to mention a few scary scenarios. First, with international transit, this is a threat to the legal status of the Northern Sea route. This is a direct threat because there is the issue of the legal status of Russian straits, because we think these are our territorial waters, but the US, and we have an expert representing the US Coast Guard here, our American partners believe these are international straits and they should have the right of passage for international transit. Any ships can use those straits for transit. So let me explain what this argument is about. The US thinks that we should rely on geography when defining whether a particular strait should be considered an international strait. And this should be automatic. But Russia thinks that the geographical criterion is secondary. The primary criterion, Russia says, is a functional one, whether this passage, this strait is actually used for transit. And of course, you all know that historically, those straits were only used very rarely for international transit. So functionally, they haven't been used as such. Okay. My second scary point, when we argued about the legal status of the Northern Sea route, there is an provision about ice-covered areas, and it gives us priority in the areas that are covered with ice for the larger part of the year. This is a very crucial point, a very crucial phrase there, because there are certain periods where ice melts and then this provision no longer applies, but for a larger part of the year, this area is covered with ice. This is another point of contention between us and Western countries. But let's say that ice melts in the Arctic. Russia is building icebreakers, and I think those icebreakers, they normally last for about 30 years. In 2019, the Coast Guard launched a new program. They started building icebreakers. One will be launched in 2025, and then they want to build 2 more icebreakers. And basically, I think they would like to build 11 icebreakers in total. So we, US experts, Coast Guard experts, everybody agrees that we will still need icebreakers, and ice is not going to melt entirely. And in addition, you don't have to use those icebreakers in the Arctic exclusively. You can also use them in the Antarctic. And since we have the US Coast Guard represented here, I would like to express my position on one issue. The US Coast Guard has always been very balanced in its approach on the legal status of the Northern Sea route, because the Department of State, the Department of Defense, they were always very hawkish, always challenging the legal status of the Northern Sea route. But the US Coast Guard has been very open-minded about this, always talking about common threats, common interests in the Arctic, cooperation. And actually, we have had a very good cooperation with the US Coast Guard. We even had an initiative on the Bering Strait. This project was initially proposed by the US Coast Guard, and it was actually quite successful. So this argument about the legal status of the Northern Sea route is very similar to the dispute that the US had with Canada about the different strait. So all the arguments offered by Russia, they're actually identical with those offered by Canada. And actually, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union and Canada were very close because their position was very, very similar on this issue. So I think we can admit this openly. Projecting control on the Northern Sea route is a security issue. It's a matter of national security. There are also environmental security aspects, etc., but it's a matter of security. So our primary goal is to protect ourselves as much as we can against all sorts of threats and risks. So the only way to resolve this dispute, I think, is we all agree to disagree. This is a very good formula, and it works very well in the dispute between the US and Canada. And I think we can use the same formula between Russia and the United States. This would be a perfect solution to the situation. The only thing we should be mindful of is, if we want to develop the Northern Sea route for international transit, and if it works out, and if we are interested in attracting international shipping companies, sooner or later we'll face the question of possibly liberalizing the status of the Northern Sea route. If we want to attract more international shipping companies, we may want to lift some restrictions. Okay, I will stop here for now. Thank you. Thank you very much. This was very interesting. You raised some very interesting issues. I think we can have a discussion regarding your questions closer to the end of our session. But for right now, let's see if we can get Mr. Kulinko back in line. Mr. Kulinko represents Rosatom, the Russian Nuclear Energy Agency. Mr. Kulinko will tell us about what Rosatom does to develop the Northern Sea route. Please, Mr. Kulinko.
Good afternoon. I would like to apologize once again for these technical glitches. Vitaliy, I understand that to some extent we have a roundtable discussion. Therefore, I'd like to give some answers to the questions raised by the previous speaker. You are free to do that. Okay, then when we're speaking about our counterparts from the United States, we always have to bear in mind that the United States would consider the Northern Sea route as a strategic route for the first time. This is about the resources which can be explored onshore and offshore. Let me tell you a story. 2 years ago, we and Myers Holding made a pilot project bringing fish from Kamchatka through that Northern Sea route. And Myers said that except for certain technical glitches, so that was a very good passage, a very good route. And certainly this is not about all year round navigation, but still. And all the fishers, all the consumers and buyers, which benefited a lot, said that no containers with fish were damaged and everything was delivered right on time. And that project was considered to be a total success. What happened in a week's time after we finished the unloading of the vessel? Actually, the Greenpeace champions started demanding dismissing the management of Mars because the company brought the containers along the Northern Sea route and therefore damaged the whole environment of the planet. After such stories, it doesn't make sense to speak about regulations or any other things because it actually always been obvious what the Americans want, and the only thing they want to prevent the development of that strategic passage by Russia. And a couple of more notes. Actually, our icebreakers live for about 40 years, whereas we do not know anything about the American icebreakers. So let's look at them in January along the Northern Sea route and whether they can break the ice there. So let me say a few words about the control and regulation a bit later. Let me proceed with my presentation. So next slide, please, and I will try to be brief as possible. So you all know the maritime territory, the marine territory of the Northern Sea route. It starts from the east along the passage and it ends in the Kara Sea. And neither Murmansk or Vladivostok or Kamchatka are included into these aquatic territories. And bear in mind what happened on February 24th, and bear in mind the needs of Russia. We have to consider the Northern Sea route as an integral infrastructure, one single transport and transit corridor. The economy also prompts us to develop that faster. Moreover, the key stakeholders in the Arctic zone, these are the coal mining companies and hydrocarbon producers, very big companies. They say that we have to bring about the all year round navigation not by 2030, but by 2026, when in the eastern part of the Northern Sea route, we have to provide for safe and secure all year round navigation. These are the results of 2021 as concerns the development of the Northern Sea route. And let me take the question raised by the previous speaker concerning the transit route. So actually the planned figure is 31 million tons and we achieved the figure of 35 million tons. We dredged the bottom and more than 27,000 tons of dredging was done, and we are building two new icebreakers. Two new icebreakers actually were commissioned, proceeding from the planned capacity. Why I'm showing that slide? We see that last year the international transit amounted to 2 million tons with a planned capacity of about 1,300,000. So there was a surge in the transit capacity, and all the partners considered the Northern Sea route as a strategic path. But now we look at the permits granted by the ministry, so the international transit will not be allowed. So due to the sanctions, we do believe that it would be very economically wise to close the Northern Sea route for the international partners. Once we communicate to our international counterparts, they say that we want that very much, but the financial risks are too high due to the sanctions imposed. So let's wait and see what may happen in future. So all the foreign companies are looking forward to sanctions being lifted and how the situation in Ukraine settles down. But in the nearest future, there will be no international transit along the Northern Sea route. These are our target figures. Let me draw your attention to the fact that actually there were no changes or amendments to the milestones and to the highlights. So by 2024, actually, we have to transport about 81 million tons. And by 2030, actually, we have to reach the figure of 150. This has been demanded by such companies as Rosneft, Novatek, and Northern Star. There are other companies who said that they are ready to attain the goals set for 2024, so they're not changing their planned figures in terms of the icebreakers. So you quite correctly raised the question of the service life of the icebreakers. There are certain figures, and I surfed the internet to see some statistics. The Soviet times icebreakers exhausted their service life and they are decommissioned. They are waiting for the scrappage. But the 4 icebreakers which are still in operation, by 2024, 2028, although all the measures were taken in order to extend the service life, there will be some warning out. Therefore, the government took a decision to build the world's biggest icebreaking fleet. And this would be unique for the world. And we are approaching these figures step by step. So 5 icebreakers are being built. And an instruction was issued by the Prime Minister to build more icebreakers. And 2 new icebreakers would be commissioned starting from 2023 at the expense of the federal budget. Rosatom commits itself to build 4 more icebreakers for the future projects. As far as we know, all the planned figures, and these icebreakers won't be atomic, and they would be built at the expense of the private budgets, private sources. So by 2025, we'll have at least 13 icebreakers in order to carry 150 million tons as planned. Certainly, the development of the Northern Sea route is not possible without necessary infrastructure. So there are still Soviet times ports operational, but in the Arctic zone, we see a tendency for building specialized ports. These are the ports that would accommodate LNG terminals being ordered by Novatek, and we partially completed them. Vostok Oil or East Oil to carry oil is being built. And if you look at the table by 2030, you cannot see that from the slide, but up to 100 million tons of oil would be carried by this company through the Northern Sea route. A coal terminal would be built. And if we look, for instance, as such companies as Norgluin and Nornickel, so this is the company which produces copper, despite actually quite modest figures in terms of the ore, copper ore to be carried about 2 million tons. But the city of Pevek will become a kind of a Klondike, would be a very huge and affluent city. So, and for sure, we'll all be glad to move to live in that city. In order to develop the Northern Sea route, we have developed the plan for hydrographic research, and there are other researches that we are doing, surveys that we're doing, so that the pilots of the ice class vessels could alternate the routes. This has been done in the framework of the national projects, and actually we get about 1,100,000 rubles for these purposes from the federal coffers. 435,000 kilometers would be surveyed by 2025. Next slide, please. And this is something that you know for sure, apart from the maritime component. The energy component is also very important. Rosatom goes on developing the modernized or upgrading floating energy blocks. We have all the necessary agreements from the companies that are operational there, and we have to supply about 4 upgraded floating energy blocks that would generate about 318 megawatt power by 2028, and 1 kilowatt hour would cost about 6 rubles. And certainly this is about a very rapid development. Getting back to Maersk and that pilot project that we did there, and certainly we try to send a message to the European colleagues. They said that digital services have to be developed along the Northern Sea route, and we made a step forward in the framework of this national project. A whole activity is being planned for, and would like to set up a unified digital ecosystem there. There would be a digital platform set up there, which will not only acquire all the data generated by the federal companies and private companies, but that platform would process that data and give you a brand new product related to the safety and security of the Northern Sea route. Also, in the framework of that project, we will make our own maps not to depend on the European partners, and this will help to control the navigation. Starting from February 24, we have clear understanding that our European colleagues, instructed by the Western masters, are disconnecting us from the sources of data from the satellites, communication satellites. And therefore, we have to set up our own radar network. That would be a typical trade. There would be onboard measuring units, measuring the depth of the ice shield, measuring actually the pressure, squeezing data, and this data would be rammed home onshore. Also, we're developing our own drones, UAV, which will carry certain radars there as well in the range of up to 100 kilometers, and the drones will make pictures and send onshore for processing. And I know that Zoom disconnected the Chinese partners, preventing them from taking part in that. But we are looking at the development of the Chinese satellites. That's a very promising story, so certainly we'd like to work very closely with them. This diversity will help us to set up a totally digital system and provide necessary services that would be totally top-notch. Next slide, please. As for the regulations are concerned, the Russian government took a decision that there have to be a one-stop shop approach applied to the Northern Sea route. Rosatom is appointed this management body. And actually, there is only an exceptional procedure pertinent to the military vessels, and there are no other limitations. So you may apply for the Glavsev Morput So this is the agency responsible for the Northern Sea route and subordinates to Rosatom. And so within 5 days, you'll get a permit to go along the Northern Sea route, if you can confirm that you have an ice class vessel. But you have to take some responsibility once going along the Northern Sea route. So, for instance, such a permit may be suspended or even withdrawn if the situation along the Northern Sea route deteriorates, or if you infringe something, or if the grade of your vessel is not complying with the requirements. Therefore, the Ministry of Transportation has delegated the right to grant permits to that agency for the springtime. Thank you so much. This concludes my remarks. I'm ready to take any questions. Thank you so much for a very consistent, very informative presentation, and certainly we'll have more questions, but I suggest that we leave that for a Q&A session. And I learned from your presentation that this is a high time for us to buy real estate in the city of Pavel. Well, unfortunately, our Chinese colleague failed to join our session for technical reasons. So that I would like to pass the floor to our colleague South Korea, Mr. Hong Sungwon from the Arctic Logistics Institute. Over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor Hong, Sungwon Hong from Youngsan University, Korea. It is great pleasure to have the opportunity to make a presentation at the round table discussion today. Today's topics are very interesting to me, and my interest lies in the possibility of regular shipping through NSL and its economic feasibility. So I'll be discussing the topic of Arctic shipping from the perspective of Korea. And please understand that what I present here during the roundtable talk is my personal opinions. So I'll be talking about 4 major issues, which are Arctic shipping and Korea's activities regarding Arctic shipping, and Korean stakeholders' position on Arctic shipping, and Russian government NSL plan. So before we go into the issues, let me briefly introduce our institute, the Institute of Arctic Logistics. Our institute has been conducting various researches regarding Arctic shipping since 2010. We have organized 11 seminars related to LNG NSL shipping. All the presentation materials are downloadable at our institute website, arcticshipping-seminar.kl, if you're interested. So as I have been doing researches on the NSL, I came to believe that there are 2 different perspectives on Russia's Northern Sea route. The Russian government considers NSL as a transport infrastructure for shipping Russian Arctic resources to Asian and European markets. On the other hand, foreign shipping companies want to use the NSL as international transit route between Northeast Asia and Europe. I believe that at current standpoint, the willingness to activate the international transit transport on the NSL by the Russian government is the most important issue. As we all know, many kinds of cargo are transported through NSL, but today I'll focus on international transit transport. In case of international transit transport, iron ore, pulp, and heavy cargoes such as wind power equipment were regularly transported through an NSL during the last couple of years. Transit volume of last year was 2 million tons. The Russian government has set a target of 30 million tons of transit volume in 2030, like Maxim Kulinko said. But I think it seems difficult to achieve that target at present, because in order to achieve the transit volume of 30 million tons, I believe securing a stable cargo base is the most important issue. Of course, currently there are different definitions on the concept of transit, but considering the transit between Asia and Europe via the NSL, some of the freight that used to be transported through the existing Suez Canal need to be transported through the NSL to meet the target volume of 30 million tons. Currently, Russian resource transportation, such as LNG and oil, account for most of NSL transportation. Among foreign shipping companies, China's COSCO is the most prominent, and Northern European carriers continue to transport resource and specialized cargo. China's state-owned shipping company, COSCO, they have successfully completed a total of 56 NSL navigations since 2013. So last year, there were 14 transports, but this year, as far as I know, they have not applied for any NSL navigation yet. So now I'd like to tell you about Korea's Arctic shipping activity. In the past, even 10 years ago, there was a great anticipation for the Arctic shipping in Korea. For example, in 2012, among the 17 laden transit voyages, 10 transit cases were associated with Korea. However, Korean shipping companies did not lead this transit transportation. Korean shipping companies have no S-class vessel. Rather, these international transit transportation were led by Nordic countries' shipping companies. So, and as for the cargos, eastbound cargos related to Korea were gas condensate and naphtha, and Korea exported jet oil and diesel oil. So far, there are very few NSL voyages led by Korean shipping companies. Since September 2015, there were only 4 heavy cargo transport led by Korea. Now I'm going to move on the status of major Korean stakeholders regarding Arctic shipping. Currently, Korean shipping companies' main concern is obviously economic feasibility of Arctic shipping. So most ship owners could not afford to have much interest in NSL shipping, and there are not enough cargoes at the moment. So as for Korean government, it had some interest in operating on the Arctic shipping routes, but the companies begin losing interest, and the government seems to taking the wait-and-see stance at the moment. Last year, our institute conducted a survey of the companies on the Arctic shipping, and let me briefly share the results. Except for shipbuilders, shipping companies' interest in the NSL was very low. The most shipping companies are very cautious about operating on the NSL due to economic feasibility. Most companies, they point out it is difficult to obtain information on the operation of Arctic shipping route. Lastly, I'd like to say a few words on the NSL infrastructure development plans of Russia. The Russian government is promoting the NSL infrastructure development plan in stages by 2035. As I understand currently, NSL operator Rosatom is promoting the Northern Transit Corridor project, NTC project, and last year, I know that DP World signed an MOU agreement worth $2 billion with Rosatom to promote the NTC project. However, I do not have much access to the detailed progress of the NTC project, and As a researcher, I'm very curious about how it is progressing. So from what I see, the ANTIS project is a large-scale project that requires international cooperation by its nature. Since the port of Vladivostok is being developed as a transshipment port, and there's a problem of securing cargo for regular container shipping. So it seems that cooperation with Northeast Asian countries such as Korea and China and Japan is needed in regard to NSL infrastructure development. So I think that Russia needs to secure container volume in major Asian markets and need the cooperation to build feeder service to major Asian ports such as Korea and China. In case of Korea, Busan port is in a situation where they need to develop new transshipment market. And China also China is expected to facilitate better maritime logistics with the two northeast provinces through the port of Vladivostok. So now I'd like to wrap up my presentation. Currently, Russian government is pushing ahead with the NSL infrastructure development plan in stages by 2035. But to promote the NSL infrastructure development plan and ultimately to develop NSL into an international transit route, cooperation among related countries seems to be in need. However, difficulties are expected with the NSL development due to the sanction imposed by international community. As for Korea, among Korean companies, the shipbuilding companies, they have been the most actively participating in the Arctic shipping. And it seems that Korean shipbuilders involved in Arctic LNG 2 project, they are now currently experiencing great difficulties. So as for Korean shipping companies and logistics company, they are likely to take more hesitant attitude than before toward advancing to the Arctic. So right now the situation seems quite unstable for Korean companies to take risk. So after the Suez Canal accident of the mega container ship Ever Given on March 2021, I have seen many discussions in Russia that NSL can be
marine pollution, securing the maritime transportation system, and global fisheries sustainability. I'll preface my comments with the provision that my statements and viewpoints are my own and don't necessarily represent those of the United States Coast Guard or the United States government. I will also state that, unlike my counterpart, Mr. Gudev, I consider myself a moderate optimist. As he previously mentioned, the Coast Guard has maintained a necessary relationship with our Arctic colleagues somewhat independently of outside external political influences. During my time as a naval officer stationed in Alaska, I had the opportunity to observe firsthand how the Arctic transportation landscape is currently changing. Climate change is evolving, and the economic possibilities and competitive landscapes within the Arctic are progressing faster than protective measures can keep up. As such, Arctic Council nations must in turn understand and adapt in order to meet new challenges before they turn into crises. Given the vast tyranny of distance and limited available resources that hamper and prolong responses to Arctic dilemmas, the need for proactivity among governments and international organizations is only growing more urgent. We have heard from the other panelists about the development of Arctic capabilities by both Russia and South Korea, and I would like to approach the topic of Arctic marine transport from a different perspective and discuss with the panel the need for intergovernmental readiness in response to the rise of Arctic marine transportation. I fundamentally believe that the international dialogue groups, such as the Arctic Council and the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, are necessary in order to react and respond to existential issues that exist beyond international borders of the High North. Despite current geopolitical tensions, Arctic cooperation remains vital for all Arctic Council nations as we combat a number of multinational and globally relevant matters. As stewards of the Arctic region, and has been mentioned previously by the other panelists this evening, the need for coordination, especially in the maritime domain, is paramount for both peace and stability. With the increasing rise in marine transportation volume, the probability of disaster becomes more likely to occur, and the demand for international cooperation all the more important. From 2019 to 2021, my role in Alaska was to prepare Coast Guard and other US and Arctic partner government officials to conduct fisheries sustainability patrols throughout the Alaskan Exclusive Economic Zone, which is an invisible border that exists 200 nautical miles off the coastline of all maritime nations that preserve the renewable and non-renewable resources that exist in those seas. My team and I developed and delivered training to law enforcement details that would embark commercial fishing vessels at sea and verify that their catch was in compliance with federal and international laws, and among other responsibilities, to protect the long-term viability of a multi-billion-dollar domestic industry. In years past, we've hosted Russian, Canadian, Norwegian, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese officials to share our best practices and receive theirs. Part of my assignment was to understand how the fish stocks migrated so as to help direct patrolling ships to where the fishing fleets would be most concentrated. During my 2 years there, we witnessed the fishing boats searching for high volume species, specifically cod and pollock, creep northward in pursuit of the available biomass. Ships up to 900 feet in length, with crews in excess of 200 persons aboard, were chasing fish that were seeking cooler waters as a result of climate change. Hundreds of other ships of smaller sizes were doing the same, with less resources to remove themselves from trouble if necessary. This posed a tremendous challenge to the US Coast Guard and the Russian Border Guard, who co-patrol the Bering Sea and respond to vessels in crisis. Despite geopolitical relations that existed between Washington and Moscow, the first responders in Alaska and Kamchatka understand the need for cooperation at the operational day-to-day levels. Juneau and Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky maintain a number of agreements that indicate how the US Coast Guard and Russian Border Guard will share information and respond to issues pertaining to saving lives and the environment when the need arises. And the regional command centers in these locations have direct communication authority with their counterpart across the Bering to pass information without first seeking approval from higher chains of command. This is most certainly a best practice. People in peril at sea do not care which nation's vessels come to save them, and oil upon the ocean's surfaces is indiscriminate to which nation's waters and shorelines they pollute. So as responsible humanitarians, all nations must be ready and willing to protect not only themselves, but their Arctic neighbors in a timely and effective manner. As climate change drives increased maritime transportation in the Arctic, we must stand ready to respond to such issues. Fishing boats, cargo transport vessels, and tourism ships are moving northward and a result of market demand and increased accessibility. More traffic inevitably means more maritime issues to contend with. As you all well know, there's not a linear parallel between increased vessels, persons, and fuel upon the sea at higher latitudes with the available response mechanisms. With increased Arctic traffic comes exponential risk. Fishermen with the same fuel tank capacities extend their voyages to seek greater hauls, and cruise ships who were previously blocked from access now arrive in greater frequency and with increased passenger capacities. This, while the already volatile weather patterns of the high latitudes become more pressurized and dramatic. Arctic amplification, the process by which melted Arctic ice exposes more of the Arctic Ocean to sunlight, which then accelerates the warming and melting of more sea ice, has a demonstrable increase in the number and intensity of Arctic-based storm systems. Ships are venturing further from the haven of port into increasingly frequent and more dangerous weather patterns in order to make a living. And we as an Arctic Council community must be able to quickly and effectively assist them when they find themselves in trouble. Given the tremendous cost to establish and maintain forward operating posts in the Arctic, response assets are limited and their response times extended. A responding vessel in warmer climates with predictable and forgiving seas can navigate 20 or more knots per hour towards a rescue case. However, in the Arctic, provided the ship can get there at all, given the ice and sea states, it may plod along across an undirect route at 5 to 10 knots, timing crests and troughs through turbulent sea states to come to the aid of survivors battling sub-freezing conditions. According to the US Coast Guard Search and Rescue computerized programming system that assists in plotting search patterns, a person of my height and build could survive for 5 days or more at sea, clinging to a life raft off the coast of Hawaii before succumbing to the elements. And this is primarily due to a lack of potable water than the elements themselves. At 60 degrees latitude, however, my survivability under the same circumstances drops to less than 8 hours, with hypothermic unconsciousness setting in within 60 to 90 minutes. The immediacy by which help is needed in the Arctic is inversely proportional to the number of responding units currently available and the swiftness that they may be deployed. So as I've detailed previously, Arctic transit potential must be matched hand in glove with protectionary measures. The reality is that the pace of government development cannot keep pace with that of entrepreneurism. I fear that there will be greater and costlier mishaps in the divide between the economic race to reach Arctic resources and the international governmental response to install guardrails to protect both the mariner from the sea and the sea from the mariner. Sustained cooperation is then critical to maintaining responsive postures to this increase in transit potential. The number of ships and people arriving to the Arctic will only increase. The need for developing lasting, sustainable mechanisms to keep those people and ships safe is a requirement of all Arctic Council nations. Building and maintaining common capabilities to include real-time information sharing is critical in securing Arctic transport and transit potentials as cooperation creates a safer and more efficient operating environment. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. That's really a pleasure to hear that the US Coast Guard is ready to go on cooperating with Russia, is ready to extend assistance to the fishers, including the Russian ones, if necessary. Colleagues, I understand that we ran out of the speakers. Unfortunately, our Chinese colleagues failed to get connected to join us. Do I understand it correctly? That we no longer have our Chinese colleague? Okay, then we have time for a Q&A, we have time for discussion. To trigger a discussion, let me ask the first question to Maxim Kulinko. As I said from the very beginning, there is a problem of throughput capacity scarcity or shortage. Can the Northern Sea route be efficiently used in order to transport cargo from the European part of Russia to the Far East and vice versa? Can we organize a really regular transit passage with a clear timetable, and what needs to be done for that? Thank you so much for this question, Vitaliy. As you know, following the instruction of the Russian government, the Ministry for the Development of the Far East is now somehow rolling out that line, trying to set up regular lines carrying goods and cargo from the eastern part of Russia to the western part and vice versa. And a number of vessels won that agenda, won that bidding, and some grants have been allocated from the public coffers in order to offset some of the costs. The situation is not easy. There is a shortage of containers. There is no one company that would consolidate all the bids that could process these applications. We do believe that we have to promote around the year navigation, and it cannot be done within 1 year. Therefore, the budget would be allocated on a yearly basis until 2024. With the hope that such first steps will help us to ensure regular navigation. Back to the problems, you know better than I do that port infrastructure have to be upgraded, and these ports have to accommodate necessary vessels, and we have to ensure the regular supply of containers. We need support from the consignors that they believe in that line and that they could rely on that Northern Sea route to carry their goods, their containers. And certainly I do support international cooperation because all our colleagues, and they're numerous, they would like to get the door-to-door service. And for instance, when we worked with the producers of timber and lumber from Arkhangelsk, and today they have to carry that by railway. And they said that if you could carry that through the Northern Sea route to the Chinese ports, safer and faster than the railway does, then we are all yours. So it means that we need such a logistics operator who would ensure such a carriage. But at the moment, actually, we have to break down this passage into several legs, carrying that by sea, then by automobile or by railway. So there is not a comprehensive logistics route yet, but we are working to that end. Thank you so much for this answer. And there is another question to you from our viewers who are watching our roundtable discussion. So the question is, what is your take on allowing military vessels and international ships going along the Northern Sea route? Well, I will not comment on the plans of the Ministry of Defense in terms of the military vessels. So this goes beyond my salary, so to say. I'm not in the position to comment on that. This is more attributable to the national security issues. If the Ministry of Defense says that this something has to be done, then this is up to them to decide. As for transit is concerned, I have already expressed my viewpoint. Within my company, there is a whole department which is in charge. It is called Rosatom Cargo, which is in charge of the development of transit. And I know for sure that they are working very closely with the international colleagues. As far as I know, they're working closely with the United Arab Emirates. The financial model proposed is quite complex, and we have to bear that in mind when deploying our icebreakers. If we succeed in that, then the transit flow and transit traffic would increase dramatically. Thank you so much. There are more questions from the chat box. And some of them also go to you, and probably our Korean colleague would add something. So the question is as follows. COSCO, Chinese company, is not going through the Northern Sea route. There were lots of discussions that the sanctions imposed on Russia would prompt for closer cooperation between Russia and China in the Arctic. Is it true or not? This is a question raised by Pavel from the Arctic Institute. Well, we have to specify, actually, since when COSCO is not going along the Northern Sea route. I'm not sure about that year, but before, Chinese COSCO would carry goods along the Northern Sea route. This is 100% true. Well, probably the question is attributable to the current situation. Is it true that China now is not carrying their goods along the Northern Sea route? Well, as far as I know, probably I'm not knowledgeable about everything. Ever since Rosatom is in charge of granting the permits. So we have not granted any permits to the Chinese companies. Probably it was done before. As for our cooperation with the Chinese and Korean partners, then we have a lot of hope that such projects would be a success, especially in terms of the shipbuilding. The explosive development, burgeoning of the Northern Sea route is going on, and the construction materials are being carried along the Northern Sea route, and a lot of hydrocarbons are being produced there, and we have shortage of vessels. We have calculated how many vessels we need. The Russian shipyards are now planning for more construction, but we need more international cooperation, especially with our Korean and Chinese partners. And therefore, we are very hopeful that they would help us, and to assuming that no sanctions would impede this cooperation. Mr. Sungwon from Korea, can you comment on that? You said that South Korean shipbuilding companies are interested in the Northern Sea route. Can you comment on that question? I apologize. May I also ask a quick question? Do you think that the Korean shipbuilding companies are ready to continue cooperation in terms of building more ships, more vessels? And before, there were some contracts signed with the Korean shipbuilding companies. Are you going to fulfill your obligations? Mr. Sungwon, over to you.
I heard from one Korean shipping company staff that they are experiencing difficulties with constructing ice-class vessel. So maybe I lack enough information, but it's impacted by it's I think sanctioned by international community have impact on building of ice-class vessel, as far as I know. Of course, I think that they want to continue to construct ice-class vessel as scheduled, as planned. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I see another question on the chat box from Mr. Sungwon to Maxim.
Насколько достижим объем в 30 миллионов тонн?
30 million tons by 2030, is it realistic?
Здесь я не очень понял вопрос.
And I don't understand the question. What is the progress of NTC project? I'm not sure what NTC project is.
NTC project means Northern Transit Corridor project. Now Rosatom, I mean Rosatom Cargo now is promoting the project, as far as I know.
Слышно меня?
Am I audible? Colleagues, as a representative of a directorate of the Northern Sea Route, I can comment only some areas that I'm in charge of, but within the company, there are certain departments. And for instance, there is Rosatom Cargo Company, where a department which is in charge of dealing with international companies, agreeing on jointly building ice-class vessels and ensuring the international transit to the European markets. So we calculated how many vessels or container-carrying vessels are needed, and the time needed in order to build these vessels was also calculated. About 9 heavy-duty container-carrying vessels are needed, and this is being synchronized with the infrastructure being built. And following the assurances from our foreign colleagues, that was very attainable, that was very realistic. But without the knowledgeable foreign colleagues, I cannot comment on how realistic it is. So if we have competent people, so let us arrange a roundtable discussion with them. Thank you. Thank you. There is a question to Mr. Gregory Hersh. The question is about the opportunities for the Russian-American cooperation in the area of maritime safety. And Mr. Gregory spoke about that in his presentation. Probably you would like to add something. Opportunities for the Russian-American cooperation. You are inaudible. Inaudible. We cannot hear you.
Мы не слышим.
We cannot hear you.
Now?
We do.
Great. Thank you. So the United States and Russia enjoy a binational agreement that helps us both respond to crises at sea, both in terms of search and rescue of distressed vessels and for response to maritime pollution, specifically oil. And those typically come together, right? So if there's a ship taking on water, they're likely to need the support of the Russian border guard or the US Coast Guard to come to their rescue. And if the ship is lost, then you have a joint response plan to contend with any maritime pollutants that may bubble to the surface as the ship is lost. So I think in that respect, it's very positive. Those operational readiness postures with the Russian border guard kind of independently of what is being done within larger geopolitical talks. And I think that's a very valuable premise to build relations off of. We have this bottom-up relationship where we, at least in Alaska, understand that we're a bit far from mainland United States, as is Eastern Russia, and we must cooperate amongst ourselves because if we don't, then we will falter in our ability to see success in whatever response we're attending to. Thank you.
Большое спасибо за ответ.
Thank you so much for this, your response.
Так, еще есть вопросы?
More questions?
Зрителей не так, я не вижу.
I don't see any questions from the viewers. Then I have a question, and probably that would be the last question, to Mr. Sungwon from Korea. You said that we need an international plan for the development of the Northern Sea route, that it has to be joined by the stakeholders and interested parties from South Korea, but at the same time, you said that South Korea at the moment is not very much interested in the Northern Sea route.
Yes.
Is there any future? Can we say that South Korean companies would ever be interested in carrying cargo along the Northern Sea route, and what cargo it might?
So I asked question to Mr. Kulinko. Is 30 million ton of transit volume in 2030 attainable? And as far as I remember, 10 million ton of transit volume in 2024, as I remember. Of course, some Korean shipping company are interested in operating on the NSR. Of course, but they want to know what kind of cargo can be delivered through NSR. So I think securing enough cargo base is the most important issue for the smooth operating on the NSR. So securing cargo, stable cargo base is most important issue for Korean shipping company. So I think, of course, general cargo will be more potential future cargo for regular container shipping. I think Russian hydrocarbon resources is a major cargo at the moment, but I think in order to achieve a huge amount of cargo volume on the NSR, I think Russian government need to consider general cargo as a major cargo. So it means Mr. Gudev mentioned, as I remember, that general cargo and container shipping, of course, regular container shipping is of interest to Korean shipping company. So I'd like to know the progress of NTC project at the moment. So, but unfortunately, I have no access to that project. Thank you.
Спасибо за вопрос. Я тогда начну.
Thank you for your question. Yes, we do have a breakdown for different types of cargo. For 2030, we think there will be 110 million tons of hydrocarbons and various concentrates, then 30 million tons of international transit. And I think if we all work together, this number is attainable. I understand, of course, what you're saying, but you're talking primarily about ports, port services. When we talk to people, they say, we are always willing and ready, but we need cargo base. So you see, what we do, we don't work with ports, we work with customers. This is the biggest problem, to find cargo that companies would be willing to send through the Northern Sea route, considering all the advantages and disadvantages of the NSR. So by 2024, domestic cargo alone for construction purposes will be 5 million tons. So there will be a lot of movement between northwestern provinces of Russia and eastern provinces. It is pretty difficult to move cargo by rail. Railroads are extremely transit corridor. I think I understand what you're talking about. In Murmansk and in Kamchatka, there are two centers that are being built for specific kinds of cargo and for certain amounts. These are container centers. And like I said, it's not my department that's in charge of this project. It's a different department. It's also part of Rosatom, but it's a different department. So they will build a new fleet of ships, and they're talking with their partners. They have a schedule they're working with. And we are even thinking about possibly subsidizing international transit during the first few years, because we understand, of course, that 30 million tons is a very impressive figure, and it's not that easy to achieve it. So during the initial stage, possibly we'll have to ask the government for subsidies. And one more point that I would like to mention. We actually never said we are an alternative to the Suez Canal, because we understand full well that 1 billion tons is 1 billion tons, and we're not even close. So we cannot be a practical, alternative to the Suez Canal. But what we are saying is we can be an alternative shipping route if we provide decent infrastructure. And we do believe that we'll have 150 million tons by 2030. This is not international transit. This is the total amount of cargo moved along the Northern Sea route. It's an ambitious goal, but if we do achieve it, it's more or less comparable to the 1 billion tons in the Suez Canal. 150 million tons. So that's what we're hoping for. Thank you. Well, I think we have to wrap up. In conclusion, I would like to ask Igor Pavlovsky, one of the organizers of our event today, to say a few words. I'm sorry for being late, but I listened very carefully to everything you said here, and this was extremely interesting. There are a few things you can do forever. You can watch the flame burning or the water running, and you can talk about developing the Northern Sea route forever. This is a very interesting project. This is a great challenge to our country. There are a lot of difficulties facing this project. And when you have economists, scientists, and practitioners discussing such subjects, it's always extremely interesting. And it's great to see how this project advances step by step, little by little. I'm a big fan of everybody who works in the Arctic. And I would like to advertise our next discussion. It will be on military security issues. I think this is going to be very interesting. A lot of things to cover there. Thank you very much. See you next time. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think we can call it a day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.